year ago, the armies of the United States and 7 other countries massed in the Arabian Gulf, preparing to free Kuwait from the occupying army of Iraq. Oil was a key factor in the conflict, and in the months before the fighting began, the risks of environmental catastrophe were obvious, as deadly oil slicks spread down the Gulf. When the shooting started in January, Iraqi soldiers were slaughtered in their thousands by the most sophisticated weapons in history. But Saddam Hussein resorted to an older weapon of his own, a scorched earth policy to deny the victors what he could not take by force. In the hours before Baghdad surrendered, the oil wells of Kuwait were set ablaze by Saddam's retreating army. Over 700 wellheads were destroyed by explosives, and the black gold of the desert now fueled an inferno. Liberated Kuwait was in flames. The victorious Allies advanced into a country engulfed by fire and choking black smoke, and everywhere, the pitiless carnage of war. There are 6 major oil fields in Kuwait: Ahmadi, Burgan, Wafra, Managish, Rodatain, Sabriya. Before the Iraqi invasion, more than 900 wells produced crude oil worth more than $35 million a day, $12 billion a year. Kuwait's oil reserves are the 3rd largest in the world, and this was the prize that thousands of soldiers had fought and died for.
Oil is a basic ingredient for the Western economies, which cannot be denied. In the absence of a true economical alternative, oil will remain for the next 30 to 40 years, as is projected. So oil did play a large part in deciding. Let's assume the other side of the coin. Had we been just a plain desert and or a bunch of Bedouins roaming the desert, do you think the West would have interfered? Oil. Always the issue of oil. Sell the people, sell everybody else. Keep the oil flowing.
The sands of the desert drifted across Saddam's dreams of conquest, covering the bodies of the slaughtered. And the oil burned and flowed into no one's hands. The United States had led the coalition to free Kuwait. Now it mobilized the resources to put out the fires that were costing nearly $250 million a week in lost revenues and threatening an environmental catastrophe. The massive task began. At airfields across North America, the U.S. Strategic Airlift Command lifted giant cargo planes with men and equipment bound for the oil fields of Kuwait. The firefighting know-how of the United States oil industry faced its toughest ever test. It was not unexpected. Before the fighting started, the Kuwait Oil Company approached specialists in the United States, asking them to prepare plans to deal with a large number of oil fires. Though they had not expected there would be quite so many.
some of the people who were here got out of the country, and they told us that there were explosives on these wells. We knew there were about 100 at that point that had been basically mined. And out of that, we figured that it would be about 70 or so of them that would require repair. We began to plan for the equipment that would be needed for each blowout control team. And by the time the shooting quit, we were ready to move.
Just can't wait to get on the road again. The life I love is making sick, my friend, and I can't wait to get on the road again.
Never before had the world seen entire oil fields set ablaze. There were fears the task would be beyond the means of the 4 small firefighting companies that had been selected to fight the Kuwait fires. There were 3 Texas-based companies, Red Adair, Boots and Coots, and Wild Well Control, and 1 Canadian company, Safety Boss. Each company had just 2 teams of firefighters, each team made up of 4 specialists and 3 mechanics. Just 58 men to deal with more than 700 blazing wells. Until now, the most fires they'd ever faced at one time was 5. Arriving in Kuwait, they set to work, trying to establish some order out of the chaos they'd landed in, already realizing that their experience was the only thing going for them.
First thing you have to worry about is getting your mind back in the organization. You know, it's unbelievable, all of the things that you see here. You start out on a project like this, the way they've worked it here is each one of the 4 major firefighting teams has been given a sector to work on the wells in that given sector. Beforehand, if equipment's not here, you have to organize that, get it coming. Some of the equipment we build here ourselves. Equipment has to arrive, has to be assembled, has to be tested. Once all of that is in order, then you can move out on your first well and begin your operation.
For all of the support services and those people that were sent to be assistants and laborers and helpers, right down to a dump truck driver. When you throw him in the situation of darkness and a loud roar, the ground is vibrating, and they do not understand technically what's taking place. So fear sets in. But as soon as you make them comfortable with the fact that the well is doing all that it can do, it doesn't present any further danger to them, it comes along rather quickly after that.
I couldn't work on the assembly line in the factory. I'd go bonkers, you know, but, you know, we go to different countries where you see different cultures and everything, and different wells, and each one of them is different, so you have to not only know the basics, but be able to improvise to meet whatever needs are necessary at that time.
We had to make do with very little equipment, and we put out some of the smaller fires, the fires that were blowing straight up that we could put out with a small amount of water, which is 1,000 barrels is what we were working with out of tanks, and they were hauling the tanks from one job to the next.
While the firefighters prepared for their awesome challenge, the fears of what effect the fires might have grew more alarming and pessimistic. There was talk of irreversible global pollution, of the Asian monsoons being disrupted and harvests ruined, of vast regions overtaken by darkness and contamination by the dense black smoke churning out from a nation on fire. Headlines carried warnings by scientists of a climatic catastrophe, of the onset of nuclear winter as Kuwait's fires blotted out the sun. The pollution from 6 million barrels of oil a day was pouring into the atmosphere, and the wind and rain would quickly transport this around the world. In Kuwait, immense columns of foul smoke belched miles into the sky as the hellfires roared. Whatever happened would rest on the firefighters' efforts. They were the spearhead of what was intended to become a huge task force. Over 1,000 support workers, backed by millions of dollars worth of essential equipment. All of it brought together in the town of Ahmadi in the middle of the oil fields, the home of the Kuwait Oil Company. After the months of military activity, American Forces Radio now had a quickly growing civilian audience. At times, it seemed as if Kuwait had become a colony of Texas. There had been advanced planning, but would it be enough? Early forecasts said it would take years to extinguish the flames, even with the best technology. And though some equipment was already in Ahmadi, from the beginning there would be a serious shortage that would hinder the fire crews. There was a twofold problem that would create growing headaches for the firefighters. The devastation that came with the Iraqi invasion had left Kuwait an empty shell. Offices and homes had been stripped of furniture and equipment. Technical records and files had been ransacked and burned. Kuwait had been gutted. Kuwait City itself was a ghost town, windblown like the desert from which it sprang. The telephone system was useless. Electricity and fresh water, non-existent. 50,000 vehicles had been destroyed. The local economy was in ruins. The return of the emir solved nothing. Martial law remained, and government had all but ceased. Political paralysis was compounded by a conflict amongst the leading figures in Kuwait. Who would receive the vast sums of money paid as commission to import the equipment that the firefighters desperately needed?
In Kuwait, with the infrastructure completely destroyed, everything had to come in. So the organization problem was one of procuring material, getting to the right place at the right time, and acquiring those services that normally are available, such as water trucks, pump trucks, transportation. All of those things have to be coordinated, and therein lies the problem that we had. Contracts, getting contracts written was terrible. That everybody wanted to get their hand on them, and they ended up with 35 signatures. Seriously. And all of a sudden we find purchasing agents who, when they look at bulldozers, they say, I can't imagine they need bulldozers. Scratch them. They haven't the slightest idea of what they're doing.
In the short term, they're saying we're losing $120 million a day, but at the same time, they're haggling with the contractors over the $10,000 or $20,000 equipments. And we know for sure that they had the advice that these oil wells were up to go in flames around in October 1990, but no contract was signed till end of February 1991.
We didn't get any equipment until sometime late March and April was the first thing we saw come in here to work with.
But there was another problem. The blazing wells themselves each had their own complex idiosyncrasies, depending on how the Iraqis had blown them apart. The problem was even worse if it was a large, high-pressure well like this one, well 120. This giant fire straddled the road into Ahmadi, its huge flame towering over the blackened landscape. Red Adair and his team had been working on 120 for over a week with no success. Even at the best of times, 120 would be hell itself to put out.
It's one of the larger ones that we've dealt with in this particular field. I was told it's capable of 10,000 barrels per day to a very small choke. So, you know, anyone's guess, maybe making 20, 30,000, nobody knows. I put an explosive in there, but at that time I couldn't even see the wellhead. And I managed to remove some more of the debris and the, we call it coke buildup. It's the unburnt oil that solidifies. The main problem is that the fire is going two vertical, or two horizontal and one vertical. Like you can see now in the background there, with the wind blowing, it rolls the one back over the wellhead so that you can't, it's almost impossible to extinguish one when they're blowing like that.
Many wells had been ablaze for months. The damaged wellheads were clogged by a thick sludge of unburnt oil residues and sand. The teams used a specially built crane jib to rake away this sludge and assess the damage. The heat from the fires is enough to melt steel, up to 2,000 or 3,000 degrees at the center. Water is poured onto the flames to cool the furnace-like air around the wellhead and give the teams a chance to get in closer. The work goes on for days until the team decides to expose the wellhead with a charge of dynamite. Explosives, enough to make a medium-sized bomb, are packed into an oil drum and carefully primed. It's a delicate, highly dangerous operation.
Explosive is nothing more than an expedient tool. And in wall control, we use it quite a bit, and it speeds up the job and then cuts down the time we spend on each blowout, and that's to the customer's satisfaction.
200 or 300 pounds of dynamite, wrapped in asbestos, are carefully placed into the heart of the fire. The asbestos must withstand a temperature of 2,000 degrees, and the suppressed tension affects everyone on the site. The massive explosion blows away tons of rubble and coke. No matter how experienced they are, the risks to the firefighters are always there.
Well, it only takes one mistake. You know, I'm sure everybody's a little apprehensive at times, but we set it down, and it's not a wham-bam, thinking-ma'am job. It's very thought out, very thorough. Should there be an accident, what we're going to do at that time and everything. Of course, you can't have a dress rehearsal.
The coke has been cleared, but the fire remains. The Hellfighters will have to return another day. Mid-afternoon in Kuwait. Over 100 oil fires have been put out, but a surreal darkness blankets the city. When winds carry soot and oily smoke from the southern oil fields, the eerie blackness dispels any optimism that the firefighters are winning their dangerous battle. Next day is as black as deepest night, lit only by the lurid glare of the oil fires. Headlights are useless, unable to penetrate the oily soot hanging in the air. On days like this, work grinds to a halt, except for maintenance jobs in the machine shops and pipe yards. The inactivity sharpens criticism that the firefighters are moving too slowly.
I've heard too much criticism. I'm up to here with it. And it's like in having one bicycle and 10 people trying to ride it. You get too many people, you're not going to get anything done. And the people, you got the best in the world doing it here. And as far as that, we got enough people. The thing we need is more equipment.
The Gulf War may be over, but Saddam Hussein's grim legacy is clear to see. The country has been consumed by fire. The smashed wells spew forth millions of gallons of oil in a fine spray, hundreds of feet into the air. It covers the landscape, coloring everything a dirty black and brown. In the desert, this black rain has created swamps, oil lakes, and islands, a foul terrain that now forms the backdrop to the unrelenting work of the fire crews as they move deeper into the oil fields to the south and west of Ahmadi. Dynamite is used more and more to clear away debris around the wellheads. The dull thud of explosions is now a constant sound as the size of the explosive charges increase daily and they are used to extinguish the fires themselves.
Snuffing the fire, no, that's a kind of a by guess and by God type of thing. You know, just through experience, we know that it might take 100 pounds or it might take 500.
We used 250 on this one here just to make a bigger boom. That one, when we shot it yesterday, it didn't seem like it was that much concussion. We were upwind, but I think we used 250 on this one here. You want to go with enough, so you just do it one time. Because after you shoot it, you tear up your monitor stands and you tear up some aluminum pipe and blow all of the tin off of your dozer and everything. So naturally, you'll want to get it right the first time.
In an instant, the massive blast snuffs out the flame, and where there was fire, now there is oil.
One thing that has concerned us, and when we shot this well out here, it was a big fire. When we shot it out the day before, we wanted to shoot it, but there was a sandstorm. And we put 200 pounds of explosives in the shot drum, and you don't want your head down that drum with all the static electricity around. That's pretty dangerous.
Dangerous or otherwise, in the rest of the oil field, the flames rage on. But the real danger comes when the fires are blown out.
The fire is the lesser of the evil. There's nothing to that. I mean, a troop of Brownie Scouts can put that fire out. It's the rest of it that counts.
And that's the more dangerous part of working on one. When you're up there removing that old wellhead and there's oil spray going everywhere, if it should ignite at that time, you'd have some people burned.
In fact, that happened here just a few days ago. 3 guys got burned. Not seriously, thank God, but not with our team, obviously, either.
In the oil firefighting business, the technical details are always larger than life. The oil surges up to the wellhead from deposits 1.5 miles inside the earth, rushing to the surface with the speed of a jet engine. To cool the wellhead for safer inspection, 4,000 gallons of seawater a minute are pumped through high-pressure hoses. The oil itself has been burning at temperatures above 3,000 degrees. The ground remains hot enough to boil water for days afterwards. But the abiding fear is always of a sudden, lethal explosion of the volatile mixture of gas and oil. Even when the fire is out, oil still rains down over the desert. Millions of dollars a day sinking into the sands. The firefighting teams must now cap the well, the most dangerous and the most exhausting stage of blowout control. At any one time, 3 or 4 wells are being capped. Some are far tougher than others. First, a giant valve called a blowout preventer has to be secured over the damaged oil pipe before the gusher can be stopped. The blast of escaping oil is deafening. The stinging mist of oil and gas covers the body, clogging eyes and invading the ears and lungs. Beyond the million-dollar equipment and enormous support teams, success in the end depends on the Herculean efforts of men like these. Taming a blazing well is a complicated, high-risk job. First, the fire has to be put out. What's left of the wellhead has to be repaired. The blowout preventer has to be worked into place. And once this is done, the oil flow is then closed off and mud is poured down the well, stopping the flow of oil.
John Wayne made a movie in 1968 called Hellfighters that, kind of glamorized the business. Believe me, it's not that glamorous.